Welcome to Sleepy Tales, a place where myths, legends, and timeless fairy tales are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love for you to share where you're from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy relaxing stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a night of our peaceful tales. Now settle in, relax, and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. In a village at the edge of a dark and endless forest, there lived a girl whose bright red hood marked her as both innocent and unforgettable. She was small, curious, and full of trust, unaware that the world could be cruel beneath its beauty. The trees whispered secrets, the shadows moved with intent, and something watched her from just beyond the path, patient and cunning. What began as a simple errand to visit her grandmother would lead her into the heart of danger, into the belly of a predator, and into a tale that has been told for generations to warn the unwary. This is the story of the Little Red Cap, also known as Little Red Riding Hood. Once, there was a girl who lived at the edge of a great forest. She was not rich, nor was her family known for anything remarkable. But she was remembered in her village for the red cap she wore wherever she went. It was a small hood made of bright cloth, given to her by her grandmother. The old woman had stitched it with careful hands, believing the child should always carry something of love and warmth when she wandered outside. The girl grew so fond of it that she would never take it off. Even in the heat of summer, she wore the cap. Even in the shade of her house she wore it. And so the people began to call her not by her name, but by her cap. They called her Little Red Cap, as if she and the hood were one. Her family was simple. Her mother kept the house and tended to the small garden that grew herbs and vegetables. Her father, when he was home, worked with wood, though often he was gone for days in search of work or in trade with nearby villages. The grandmother lived deeper in the forest, far enough that one had to follow a winding path to reach her small home. She was old and often weak, but she was kind. She had once been strong enough to guide others through the woods, and she still remembered the twists of the paths and the sounds of the animals that lived there. Now she lived alone, kept company only by her small fire and the memories of her long life. Little Red Cap was innocent, the kind of child who believed the world was good simply because she herself was good. She trusted easily, smiled quickly, and thought little of danger. She was curious about the world around her, noticing the way flowers leaned toward the light, or how mushrooms sprouted after a night of rain. When she walked, she often stopped to watch ants building their hills, or birds fluttering in the branches above her. She loved the forest, though her mother warned her never to stray from the path when she passed through it. But to a child, warnings are like shadows, present yet easy to step beyond. The forest itself was a place of two natures. In the morning, when sunlight slipped between the trees, it seemed alive with beauty. The leaves glowed with light, the flowers opened, and the air smelled of earth and green growth. It was easy to believe the forest was a friend, that it offered only wonder and safety. Yet the forest also had its other side. At dusk, the paths darkened quickly. The trees pressed close, the shadows stretched long, and the silence of the woods grew heavy. There were animals that hunted when the light faded, and sounds that reminded travellers how small and fragile they were among the tall trees. To those who knew its secrets, the forest was not only beautiful, but dangerous. It could shelter or swallow, depending on who walked its paths. One morning, Little Red Cap's mother called her into the kitchen. On the table stood a basket. Inside were bread, cakes, and a small bottle of wine. The mother explained that grandmother was ill and needed something to eat and drink to make her stronger. She asked Little Red Cap to carry the basket to her grandmother's house, for the path was not far, and the girl was light-footed. But she warned her child to be careful, not to dawdle, not to wander, and not to speak with strangers. The mother's words were clear, but like all warnings given to the young, they seemed more like gentle rules than urgent commands. The girl listened with a nod, her red hood tied neatly beneath her chin. She held the basket with excitement, for the thought of visiting her grandmother pleased her. She did not imagine danger waiting in the woods, nor did she think her mother's warning meant anything more than be good. Children often believe the world bends to their innocence, that if they mean no harm will come to them. So it was with Little Red Cap, who believed the forest was only what she had seen in the light. Flowers, animals, trees, and paths leading safely to her grandmother's door. The path stretched ahead, and the day was bright. The girl stepped into the forest with her basket, her red hood catching the light whenever the sun broke through the branches. To the birds, she was just another moving thing in the woods. To the trees, she was small and light, almost unnoticeable. But to the darker eyes that sometimes watched from the shadows, she was something else. Young, trusting, alone, and easy to follow. For the forest was not only made of trees and flowers, it was also home to those who understood how innocence could be turned into opportunity. Among them was one who moved silently, whose fur blended into the shadows, whose eyes shone with a hunger not only for food, but for power over the weak. This creature was patient, clever, and merciless, and he was watching. He was a wolf, though not just an ordinary one. He was a wolf who knew how to wait, how to trick, and how to strike when the moment was right. Little Red Cap, however, knew nothing of this. She walked with the lightness of someone carrying a gift, humming softly to herself, her basket swinging from her arm. She thought only of her grandmother's face when she arrived with food and wine. She thought of the warmth of the small house, and of sitting beside the fire while her grandmother told her stories. She thought of how proud her mother would be that she had gone on the errand all by herself. The girl's heart was full of trust, and her steps were without fear. But the forest had its secrets, and already she was no longer alone on the path. The forest had a way of swallowing sound. When Little Red Cap stepped deeper onto the path, the busy noises of her village faded behind her, and the quiet pressed in like a heavy blanket. It was not silence exactly, for the forest was alive, but its sounds were different from human ones. Leaves whispered against one another high above. Birds called from unseen branches, their songs rising and falling as if speaking in a secret tongue. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked under the weight of something moving and then stilled again. The forest never stopped speaking. yet it spoke in ways that reminded travellers they were strangers here, moving through a place that belonged first to the trees and only second to people. To a child, the woods seemed like a game. The shadows were not warnings, but hiding places for imagined creatures that were never truly there. The shifting light was not a danger, but a kind of magic that painted the ground in patterns of gold. Little Red Cap walked with her basket swinging, her red hood bright against the muted colours of the path. The deeper she went, the more she forgot her mother's words. Warnings are easy to remember at the edge of danger, but once a child steps inside, the danger becomes invisible, hidden beneath beauty. Everywhere around her, small distractions called to her eyes. She saw wildflowers sprouting in clusters, their petals stretching open as if smiling at the sun. She paused to look at them, and in her innocent joy, she thought it would be kind to bring some to her grandmother. What harm could it do to gather a little beauty for someone who lived alone? She bent down and picked the first flower, then saw another one, brighter still, a few steps off the path. She followed, her small shoes crunching the leaves, and found another and another, as if the forest itself was tempting her deeper. The air was warm, but the shadows beneath the trees were cool. Little Red Cap moved with the lightness of one who has never been afraid. She was so busy plucking flowers, filling her hands with colours, that she did not notice when the forest itself seemed to shift, for the forest was not empty. Watching from the distance was a figure with sharper eyes than hers, eyes that had watched children and travellers before, eyes that gleamed with a hunger that was not satisfied by berries or flowers. The wolf stood among the shadows, his fur melting into the dark of the trees. His paws were silent on the earth, but his mind was not silent. It was sharp, turning over ideas like stones, searching for the perfect way to strike. He had seen children before, but rarely one so alone. He had smelled the sweetness of food in her basket, but it was not bread or wine that stirred his hunger. It was the girl herself, small, trusting, easy to deceive. To attack her now would be simple, but the wolf was not only a creature of strength, he was also cunning. He knew that true success came from patience, from tricking the prey into offering itself willingly. He crept closer, though still far enough that she did not notice him. She was bent over the flowers, humming to herself, her hood bright against the green. To him, she looked almost like a bird that had flown into the wrong nest, unaware of the hawk circling above. The wolf's mouth curved into something like a smile, though it was not a smile of kindness. It was a smile of teeth and certainty. The path through the forest was not one, but many. Those who lived nearby knew the safe way, the short path that led straight to the grandmother's house. But there were other paths too, winding longer through the woods, lined with things that could distract and delay. The wolf knew these paths well. He knew that a child could be led away from safety if only her mind was turned from her mother's warning. And he knew he was the one who could turn it. The wolf stepped carefully, watching her, planning his trick. He did not need to rush. The girl's innocence was already leading her away from the path. All he had to do was push her a little further, and she would be exactly where he wanted her. Deep enough that the forest itself would help him, hiding her from all eyes but his. The longer path wound past thick trees, past streams that glittered in the light, past more flowers than any child could carry. It was slower, but it was also tempting, filled with a kind of beauty that children could not resist. The wolf thought of the grandmother's house waiting at the end of the short path. He thought of the girl's small steps. He thought of how quickly he could reach the house if she was distracted long enough. He would have time to play his part there before she even arrived. And so the trap began to form, not with claws or fangs, but with cunning. The forest seemed to help him, offering the child more flowers, leading her feet further from the safety of the path. The air grew quieter, as though holding its breath. The wolf's plan was simple: to let the girl believe she was free, while in truth she was walking where he wanted. He would give her the illusion of choice, but her choice would always serve him. Little Red Cap, her hands full of flowers, looked around with delight. She thought of how happy her grandmother would be to receive them. The idea filled her so much that she did not feel the shift in the forest around her, nor the eyes that followed every step she took. She only knew that the day was bright, the air was sweet, and the forest was full of treasures waiting for her to gather. The wolf watched, silent and sure, as the girl wandered. He knew her kind. Children who believed the world was safe simply because they were in it. He knew how to wait for the moment when innocence would open the door to danger. And in this forest, doors were many, but all of them, sooner or later, could be led to him. The wolf knew the forest as well as a man knows the walls of his own house. Where others saw only confusion and endless trees, he saw paths, shortcuts, and hidden ways that cut through the undergrowth like veins. He moved swiftly now, no longer watching the girl who lingered among the flowers. He did not need to. She was slow, easily delayed, and the forest would keep her occupied. He, however, could reach her grandmother's house long before she even thought of turning her steps back to the path. The house stood alone, far from the safety of the village. It was small, its walls built of timber darkened by years of weather. Smoke sometimes rose from its chimney, but more often it did not, for the old woman who lived inside lacked the strength to keep a fire burning all day. The roof sagged a little under the weight of years, and moss crept up its edges, softening it into the forest around it. It was not a house of riches, nor of strength, but of memories. Inside, the grandmother sat in her chair. She was frail, her body bent with age and illness. Her hands trembled when she lifted them. Her breathing came slow, and her eyes no longer saw as they once did. She lived in quiet, surrounded by the silence of the woods. She waited often for visits, for company to break the long hours, and it was the thought of her granddaughter's red hood that brightened her spirits. The child came from time to time with gifts from her mother, bread, wine, and laughter that filled the house. Today, the old woman expected her again, and she smiled at the thought, though her strength was little more than a flicker. The wolf knew this too. He had watched, learned, and remembered the pattern of the girl's errands. He knew who waited inside the house. He knew she was weak, alone, and trusting. She would not question the voice of her granddaughter at the door. When he reached the cottage, he did not hesitate. He stood at the door, his breath steady, his plan sharp in his mind. The wolf was not only a hunter of flesh, but of hearts. He knew how to sound harmless, how to wear innocence like a mask. With a low, careful voice, he let out a sound to mimic the girl. Soft, small, the tone of someone carrying kindness in her hands. The grandmother stirred at the sound. Her ears, though dulled with age, still caught the faint call. She thought of her granddaughter and felt relief that she would not be alone for long. She welcomed what she believed was her visitor, telling her to come in. She did not know that with those words she had opened her door not to safety, but to the end. The wolf slipped inside. The house smelled of age and smoke, of herbs hung from the beams and bread long gone stale. The air was warm but thin, the kind of warmth that fought against emptiness but never quite defeated it. The old woman, weak and trusting, tried to rise from her chair, but the effort was too much. She thought she saw her granddaughter's shape in the doorway, but her sight was clouded, and her hope made her blind. In a single motion, the wolf leapt. There was no time for the grandmother to cry out, no time to realize her mistake. His jaws opened, his teeth closed, and she was gone. The house, which had been filled with the slow, tired breath of an old woman, now fell into silence once more. The wolf swallowed, his hunger partly sated but his plan unfinished. For it was not only the grandmother he sought, it was the girl. The red-hooded child still wandered the woods, her basket filled with food, her mind filled with innocent thoughts. And she would come to this house, as her mother had told her, believing she was walking into safety. The wolf meant for her to walk into something else entirely. He turned his eyes to the bed. It was small, simple, with covers patched and worn from years of use. The wolf pulled them back and slipped inside, arranging the blankets around him. His body, larger and rougher than the grandmother's, pressed awkwardly into the mattress, but the shadows of the house and the dim light worked in his favour. He drew the covers up to his chin, letting only his head show. His ears pricked upward, sharper than any grandmother's, but in the gloom they might pass unnoticed. His eyes gleamed, but he narrowed them into slits, pretending weakness. His long snout, with its teeth hidden beneath a thin smile, settled against the pillow. The wolf's disguise was not perfect, but it did not need to be. He counted on the girl's trust, her eagerness to see her grandmother, and her blindness to danger. He counted on the innocence that would explain away every odd shape, every strange shadows, every uneasy feeling. She would not see him for what he was until it was too late. The house itself seemed to shift with the wolf inside. Where once it had been a place of rest, it now felt like a trap disguised as comfort. The fire burned low, casting long shapes across the floor. The walls, once plain, now seemed to close in, holding the air heavy and still. The bed, once a place of safety for an old woman, became the stage for a silent deception. Every corner of the room whispered danger, though there was no one there to hear it. The wolf lay waiting, his breath steady, his eyes half closed. He was patient. He could wait as long as it took for the girl to arrive. Hunger did not make him reckless. It made him precise. He thought of the moment when the door would open, when the red hood would appear, when the child's eyes would light up with recognition that was not real. He thought of her voice calling out, of her footsteps crossing the room, of her trusting approach to the bed. He imagined all of it, savouring it before it even happened. The forest outside was quiet. The girl was still wandering, still gathering flowers, still walking without fear. But the house was no longer the safe destination she believed it to be. It was now the wolf's den, hidden beneath the shape of a grandmother's home. And the wolf, disguised in borrowed shadows, waited. The little cottage in the clearing seemed exactly as it always had, a humble structure resting among the trees, its thatched roof bending slightly with age, its wooden shutters closed against the drifting air of the forest. Smoke no longer curled from the chimney, but Little Red Cap, burdened with her basket and her good intentions, did not notice. Her mind was still filled with the forest's flowers, with the remembered scent of moss and meadow, with the idea that her grandmother would be pleased at such gifts. She approached the door with a heart unguarded. She'd heard nothing of footsteps racing before her, no whispers of a creature moving with intent through the trees. To her, the forest was still only trees, and the cottage was still only home. Yet within, the shape of the world had shifted entirely. Grandmother was gone, swallowed whole by shadow and hunger, and in her place the wolf waited. He had made himself small against the bedding, pulling the blankets up to his chest, arranging them with the clumsy precision of a predator imitating what it had devoured. The cap that had once crowned the old woman's hair was now crooked upon his head. The glasses that had rested upon her nose now framed a gaze that gleamed too brightly. His claws were hidden, his teeth concealed behind a mouth that pressed itself closed with exaggerated care. The room itself seemed changed by his presence. What had been warm now felt stifled. What had been comforting now held menace. The hearth, though still warm, threw its glow unevenly, as though the flames themselves hesitated. The wooden beams groaned faintly overhead, as if the house itself wished to warn her, but could not form the words. Little Red Cap stepped across the threshold unaware. She carried her basket to the bedside with the same trusting gait she had always shown, her hood falling slightly back from her face. She saw her grandmother there, or what appeared to be her grandmother, and felt the stirrings of unease, though she could not yet name them. It began subtly with the shape of the eyes. They seemed larger, too round, too fixed upon her, with an intensity that did not belong to age or affection. She thought her grandmother's face looked strange, but she told herself it must be the firelight playing tricks. Then, as she moved closer, other details whispered to her doubts. The ears seemed sharper, higher upon the head, not softened by hair or age. The hands, resting stiffly against the blanket, appeared broader, the nails more pronounced, as though sharpened by something other than household tasks. Still, she was a child, and children are often slow to turn unease into fear. She tried to explain each oddity away. Perhaps her grandmother had changed with illness. Perhaps she simply had not visited in long enough to remember correctly. Each detail pressed upon her innocence, and each time she smoothed it down with reason that did not hold. But reason faltered when she came close enough to see the mouth. It was not the gentle line she remembered, not the mouth that had kissed her forehead or offered bread and comfort. It was wide, stretching too far, lips curling back slightly as though struggling to contain something vast and sharp behind them. The corners twitched, not with mirth, but with restraint. Her heart quivered. A child's mind still clung to hope, still whispered that this must be her grandmother, no matter how strange, no matter how wrong. She wanted to believe in the safety of the familiar, but the wolf, patient and merciless, had waited for precisely this moment. The tipping point where innocence questioned but had not yet fled. The house seemed to hold its breath. The fire cracked once, sharply. The wolf, unable to contain the illusion any longer, stretched himself upward, the blankets falling away from him like discarded skin. His form was too large for the bed, his body straining against the fragile wood of the frame. No disguise could cover the truth now. Little Red Cap saw it all at once, the eyes, the ears, the hands, the mouth, and realised too late what she had entered into. The forest had offered her a choice of paths, and she had walked the one that led here, to this bed, to this trap. The wolf did not hesitate. With a lunge, he cast aside the remnants of his ruse. His jaws opened wide, wider than seemed possible, and before her innocence could even shape itself into a scream, he devoured her whole. It was not a battle. There was no struggle. She was small, he was vast, and the moment had been arranged too carefully for chance to intervene. The basket fell to the floor, its bread and wine spilling across the boards, a mockery of the gift she had meant to give. The room returned to silence, save for the sound of the wolf settling back into the bed, his hunger briefly sated, his belly swollen now with both grandmother and child. The cap still sat upon his head, though now tilted more absurdly than before, and the glasses clung to the bridge of his nose, framing the gleam of satisfaction. In that silence, the story itself seemed to pause. Innocence, so bright and trusting, had been swallowed into darkness. The forest that had seemed both safe and unsafe had revealed its crueler truth. Safety had been an illusion, and danger had worn the face of familiarity. The predator, having succeeded, closed his eyes. He lay in the bed as though nothing had happened, as though the cottage had not shifted into a den of deception. The fire still burned low in the hearth, the beams still groaned with the weight of silence, and the forest outside remained unaware. For now, the wolf rested. For now, the house was quiet. For now, the tale held its breath, lingering in that terrible stillness before the next turn. The darkness had swallowed all, and yet the story was not done. The forest was quiet in the afternoon sun. The leaves whispered softly, and the path through the trees was still bright with dappled light. Birds called to each other, and the small creatures of the underbrush scurried about, unaware of the tragedies that had occurred in the cottage on the edge of the clearing. It was a day like any other, except that not all was right in the quiet wood. A huntsman was moving along the path. He was tall and strong, a man accustomed to tracking, to reading the signs of the forest. He walked with care, his eyes scanning the shadows, his ears tuned to every sound. The forest spoke to him as it never spoke to a child. Every broken twig, every rustle of leaves, every faint sigh of wind was a message he could read. And it was from these small signs that he first noticed that something in the woods was wrong. He came upon the small cottage, its familiar shape among the trees. He had passed it many times before, on errands of work or rest, but today it seemed different. The door was slightly ajar. The air around it smelled faintly of something heavy, a scent that did not belong to the normal quiet of the house. The huntsman paused, hand on his axe, listening. From inside came a sound that raised the hair on the back of his neck, the heavy, uneven breathing of someone sleeping, or something pretending to sleep. It was a snore, slow and deep, far too loud for an old woman alone. The huntsman's mind worked quickly. He knew the woods, and he knew that wolves could be clever, that predators could imitate the innocent and the weak. He could sense the danger before he even saw it, that feeling like a shadow brushing against the skin of his understanding. He stepped closer, cautious, until the cottage door was fully open to him. The snoring continued, rhythmic and strange. Something in its sound told him that the wolf, or something like it, was inside. He could not yet see the form, but instinct and experience guided him. He lifted his axe, the handle firm in his hands, and stepped inside. The room was dim, the fire low in the hearth, and there, in the bed, he saw the wolf. It was larger than any ordinary beast, its belly swollen, its eyes closed in what it believed was victory. The wolf had eaten, and now it slept, unaware that the forest had sent one who could undo its work. The huntsman acted quickly, bringing the axe down. The wolf's eyes opened in shock, but it was too late. One swift strike, and the predator was dead. Yet the story did not end with the fall of the wolf. The huntsman, skilled and careful, cut open the creature's belly, as Grimm's tale described. From the darkness inside, he lifted the grandmother first, coughing but alive, then the little girl, still pale from fear and the closeness of death, yet unharmed. They stumbled from the wolf's belly as though waking from a nightmare, blinking at the firelight, the world outside, and the man who had saved them. It was a rebirth of sorts, a rising from the belly of death itself. What had been swallowed, hidden, and almost lost returned to the world of light. The forest, which had hidden danger so well, now revealed its capacity for rescue, for order restored. The huntsman stood silently, watching them recover, understanding that the balance of the woods was delicate, that innocence must be protected, that predators may always lurk, and that caution, care, and awareness were as necessary as bravery. Little Red Cap, her red hood still perched upon her head, looked at the cottage with new eyes. She understood, though in fragments, what she had survived. The colours of the forest, once distractions for a wandering child, now seemed sharper, more precise. She noticed the paths, the angles of the sunlight, the spaces where shadows moved. She carried the memory of the wolf in a part of her mind that could not be erased, a warning etched into her awareness. The grandmother embraced her granddaughter. Their relief was quiet but profound. The basket lay on the floor, scattered with bread and wine, a small casualty of the day's horrors. But the warmth of reunion replaced the emptiness of fear. They had been consumed and returned, touched by death and spared by intervention. The forest outside continued to breathe, unchanged yet forever altered by the events inside the cottage. And so the moral of the tale settled into the hearts of those who survived it. Straying from the path carried consequences, even when the temptation was beautiful, even when curiosity whispered softly in a child's mind. Innocence was precious, but it was also vulnerable. And the wolves of the world, those who wore disguises, who took the shape of familiarity, could strike in ways no child or even adult might anticipate. The Red Hood, once only a gift of love from a grandmother, now became a symbol. It marked the girl as innocent, yes, but also as one who had survived, as a warning to others who might wander carelessly. Children who wore red, or who followed paths through the forest, might remember her story, the dangers hidden in beauty, the predator disguised in comfort, the rescue that allowed life to continue. It was both celebration and caution, a tale to teach the eyes to notice what lies beneath the surface. The huntsman left the cottage, returning to the forest paths he knew so well. He did not linger. The danger was ended, the predator dispatched, the victim safe. The forest once more settled into its rhythm, the trees rustling in wind and sunlight, birds calling to each other as though nothing had happened. But for those who had been inside the cottage, nothing would ever be quite the same. The memory of being consumed and returned lived inside them, a mark of awareness and survival. Little Red Cap, holding her grandmother's hand, walked back toward her home. She had seen the forest in both its beauty and its terror. She had witnessed the transformation of a place of safety into a den of danger. And she had emerged alive, aware, and marked forever by what had happened. Her red hood, bright and unmistakable, remained upon her head. It would be a reminder always of innocence, of danger, and of the wisdom earned by surviving what should have destroyed her. The story ended not in fear, but in caution and learning. The paths of the world were many, the dangers hidden among the familiar, and the forest, vast and deep, remained a place where life and death, innocence and cunning coexisted, teaching all who walked its shadows the importance of vigilance, of respect, and of never underestimating the wolves that might be waiting behind the shapes of those we trust. In the end, the Red Hood was more than a gift. It was a warning. It was a badge of innocence reclaimed. And for Little Red Cap, it became a mark of wisdom born from darkness. A small child returned from the belly of a wolf, and a story that would echo through the forest and the minds of all who heard it for generations to come. The forest settled around her, quiet but alive, and she walked on, aware, watchful, and unbroken, carrying the memory of danger as closely as the bright red cap upon her head.